Hello, this is Stephen Olita, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This video is in response to Soteriology 101's video on who causes new birth. I have this video up already with no narrations, but I thought I would make a quick video showing my comments. You see, we have a young teenage Mary, and she's speaking to Dr. Leighton Flowers. And she asks Dr. Flowers, she kind of transposes his question a little bit, because Dr. Flowers definitely addressed the issue that God does cause new birth. And she reframes the question a little bit and says, Dr. Flowers, who causes God to new birth us? And Dr. Flowers was clear in his video that man causes God to new birth us. And the men that are capable of causing God or triggering God to generate this new birth are those who humble themselves and trust in Him. And you that are watching the ongoing battle between Dr. Flowers and Calvinists concerning soteriology know that this battle is going on. And I wanted to give a Catholic perspective and use an interlocutory in this young teenage girl named Mary. And now we see Dr. I'm not sure he's a doctor or PhD, but John Piper make an appearance into this conversation. And this is actually a quote from him. And he addresses the fact that the last bastion of pride is that we are the originators of faith. And you can see that Dr. Flowers, even though he seems to succumb to Mr. Piper's suggesting that God causes everything, he will not give way on the act of a human to trigger this regeneration. Okay, now we're bringing the players back into the scene, and the young Mary is touting that she knows the answers, but actually she's learned those from the nuns in Catholic school. And she says, Mr. Piper, you are right. God is the originator. Which shouldn't be a big revelation. God is the originator of everything. God gives man a measure of his divine nature. This second nature is an interloper. And if you look up the word interloper, it's someone that kind of doesn't belong and is somewhat of an intruder. However, but that man will now be in a state of grace. A state of grace is a way of describing somebody's friendship with God. There are three states of matter: liquid, gas, and solid. And I understand there's a fourth state. But this is a state of man where he's in the state of grace. And if he were to die in this state, he would move on in friendship with God. And otherwise, if he continues to pursue this state of grace, a gestation process will begin and grow toward full development. And when you're talking about born again, it makes sense to use terminology that is in our vernacular to explain what transpires in our first birth. Okay, now Dr. Flowers is going to enter, and I think he's going to enter into the fray a little bit here. See what he says. Oh, it's back to Mary. After that, Dr. Flowers, you are right. That man can accept or reject the intruder, the interloper, which is God's own divine nature. And Mary continues to speak and says, if man's fallen human nature and an instance of divine nature can coexist, that will allow God to continue his good work, and he will increase the divine measure and wait for a growth response. So this divine nature coexists with man's fallen human nature in direct odds with one another. And here, I think this is a quote from 1 Corinthians. God is always faithful to complete his good work. And Mary is basically telling the man who's accepted the intruder or the interloper that God, he doesn't have to worry about God. God's going to be faithful to complete his good work. And she's talking now to Mr. Piper. As you see, God's divine nature is a tangible gift, along for the ride, so to speak. There for the duration, for the whole gestation process, assuming man does not sin and kick the interloper to the curb. You see, God's divine nature cannot exist in someone that is guilty of sin. So if someone sins, then the divine nature will beat it, will be out of there. And actually, the only way to obtain forgiveness such that God's divine nature would be shared again with you, giving you a mulligan, so to speak, would be as if you received the sacrament of reconciliation. Then Dr. Flowers, if that man allows the interloper to stay on board until he possesses the full measure of God's divine nature, which is basically the gestation process of becoming a child of God, then that man who worked as a co-creator on his own new birth will be born again, methodically raised from the dead to a full share of the Trinitarian life. Now that's quite a statement, that man will work as a co-creator. I've heard it said that by Dr. Scott Hahn that we work like it's 100% us and pray like it's 100% God, and that born again process will be a work of both in a co-creation process. Okay, and Mary is taking the position that her Catholic education and the nuns have got it right, and that she's perfectly capable of further instructing John Piper and Dr. Flowers in this soteriology matter, and announces that there will be forthcoming videos to explain exactly how we obtain that initial gift from God, or where it's dispensed it would be a more correct way of putting it. Where is that gift dispensed? And then she chooses to summarize her presentation with St. Paul's letter to the Philippians Chapter 2, verse 12 and 13, where St. Paul tells the Philippians to work toward their salvation. And I wanted to interject this because the Reformed theology indicates that the output is a step function, that you immediately go from not being a child of God to becoming a child of God almost instantaneously, not in a progressive matter. But you can see St. Paul here is using the word toward. Work toward your salvation with fear and trembling. So you got to start somewhere and as a seed, and allow that nurturing seed to grow and increase. And then in verse 13, St. Paul says, "For it is God who works in you, both so as to choose." Now what he's saying there is not that God is choosing, but you are choosing. And you are acting in accord with his good will. For it is God who works in you both so as to choose and so as to act in accord with his good will. Thank you.